Hello everybody, welcome back. The Music Fan is here bringing smiles to the faces, knowledge to the people, and most importantly, music to the masses. And we have rung in a new year. It's 2019 everybody. Glad we got through 2018, hoping everyone is having a great start to their year, already getting some of their goals done or keeping to them. But before I can truly ring in 2019, I have one video and a little bit of unfinished business to attend to. So we are here now talking about the final part of the Digging Through Discography with Mumford & Sons. We've already talked about the first three albums, Sigh No More and Babel being very similar in style, Wilder Mind taking this more electronic approach, and now we are at Delta. So no more time to waste, let's start the timer, and here we go. So a little bit of background before getting into Delta. On June 17, 2016, Mumford & Sons released an EP called Johannesburg. I have never listened to it. It kind of got away from me. I'll check it some other time if you guys want me to take a look at it. So that was basically the only thing other than touring that they did. Now going on to the actual Delta recording process. The band recorded more than 25 songs with Paul Epworth at the Church Studios, and were intent on keeping the collaborative spirit of their live shows and 2016 EP Johannesburg. Marcus Mumford said that much of the album was recorded in non-gender specific Friday night lad sessions with friends where they would play music, smoke cigarettes, and have a great time. Around 100 people were involved in these sessions, with some being featured on the record, including American singer-songwriters Maggie Rogers, Yebba, and Gil Landry. Delta has been called an album that draws on shared experiences on being on and off tour, distinct from the band's anthemic previous albums, in that it is more tender and introspective and reflective. It claims that it incorporates some electronica, rap, and jazz, so I'll talk about whether that actually is the case. It has been said to contain the intimacy and jubilance that the band is known for, but Ben Lovett said it also concerned with the 4 Ds: death, divorce, drugs, and depression. So Marcus Mumford spoke to Annie Mac about reusing the folk instruments that they were known for, and basically he said that he wanted to use these instruments but in a way that they were not usually used, at least for them, so to open up a new world musically for them. The album was released on November 16th, 2018 through Gentlemen of the Road and Island Records. And so far the album has had 2 singles, Guiding Light, which dropped on September 20th, 2018, and If I Say on October 25th, 2018. Now, I tried to keep myself in the dark for this particular album, especially with going through all the Digging Through Discography stuff. I felt like I wanted to hear the first 3 albums again before I make any opinions on this album. I did listen to Guiding Light, and I enjoyed it for what it was. It sounded like a harken back to their previous stuff, no more electronic, but there was still some really cool ideas on there. So listen to the whole entire album, and here's what I have to say. I'm going to start off by coming up with a phrase that I think perfectly describes this album, and I'm going to call it beautifully boring. Now, it seems like 2 words that don't necessarily work very well together, but I think that ties this particular album very well. And what I mean by that is this album on its own is very hard to listen to in one sitting. Not that there aren't great songs on it, it's more that this album is 14 tracks long and over an hour's worth of material. This is easily the longest album of theirs to date. It's very hard when a lot of stuff does sound very similar, but if you take the moment to pick and choose particular songs, there are a lot of good stuff on this album. Going back to Guiding Light, one of my favorites on the album, because it goes back to that sound that they were incorporating in the first 2 albums, but still uses a more current sound. They use some 80s electronic drums, which feels a little bit weird. I don't know why they're doing it. Maybe to keep it a little bit more mainstream, and with those ideas in the mainstream right now that tend towards the more 80s side of pop music. But I think it's cool. It plays around with the timing of the melody and the timing of the verses. And even in the vocals themselves, there is a G major 7, like so, do 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 do, and that melody, and which I think is a really nice touch. a fun song, and one of the fun songs at the beginning. When there's a lot of energy, I think it works pretty well. Beloved is another one of these examples that, again, feels a little bit like previous work, but it does have a little bit of that harder sound and a little bit more of that electronic tinge. I think there's some great harmonies on the chorus, and the guitar parts are pretty in contrast against that electronic drums that come in a little bit later. Like with previous songs, they play around with the length of the chorus. I believe it's only 3 measures per idea. So I like, at least when they're coming up with some more mainstream ideas, they at least play around with the arrangement and give you something different to grasp onto. However, I will say that those ideas have been done better on other albums, but it is still a fun song to listen to. And there are others that kind of straddle that line between subdued and more anthemic, or more upbeat, if you will. One of those being Woman, which is, to me, one of the better songs on the album. It does feel a little bit popish at times, where Mumford's vocals kind of feels like something that Lana Del Rey would sing. The chorus itself is very mainstream, very popish to what a lot of the more indie mainstream ideas out there. It follows that pattern, so it definitely does feel like one of the more pop and mainstream songs on the album. While I will say, though, is that there are some interesting guitar parts, and it has this atmospheric harmonies, kind of like Radiohead's Nude off of In Rainbows. Not as good as that song, but there's at least a couple different touches on here that does feel interesting and strays it away from that more mainstream idea. And the chorus is fun, even if it builds off of different ideas from other bands. The other two that kind of stray that line don't really work as well, 42 being one of these culprits. It's the opening song, and it's an alright song. It builds decently, but the mixing sounds so weird on the vocals, and I don't know why they would use this as a opening song. Interesting enough, the reason why it's called 42, because it is the 42nd solo release from this band. You know, if you go through all the other albums that they have put out, this is the 42nd song that they have debuted. And then, unfortunately, the other one that also is a little bit on the worst side is Delta. It's not that it's bad, it's just, it's the longest song, it's a closing song, and it starts very nicely with some very subdued work, and then eventually it gets into this slower, more energetic part. And none of it meshes well together for me. It's weird that these two are the ones that are trying to use a lot of energy and are the beginning and ending songs, because these are the first and last ideas that you get to listen to. And unfortunately, neither of them do too well for me. Most of the rest of the album is more subdued. And when you get into it, there's a lot of really good stuff if you pick and choose. For example, The Wild is my favorite song on the album because it starts so well with some simplistic piano work, some nice acoustic guitar, and the melody is very low and very subdued, and I love the idea of what they're trying to put here. It's a very somber song about coming back home from being on the road, where the road is the bubble of like being away from everything, and then coming back home and realizing that reality isn't as fine as we claim it to be, and dealing with the struggles at home. It's a beautiful song that builds well. It has this little weird part in the middle, but it builds well with these nice horn and string lines that I think is one of the best ones on the album. It kind of feels like some of these other very complex works like Ghost We Knew or I Gave You All, and it's these ones that build so well throughout the whole entire album that I think that they still do very well, and I love that they tried something a little bit different with those string parts. Another one of these very subdued songs that works so well is Wild Heart. It feels a little bit like previous work on the first two albums. The melody is beautiful. It kind of reminds me, weirdly enough, of Landslide. Again, not saying that it's as good or better than Landslide. It's not, but it just is this very nice and relaxed idea with some beautiful messaging and beautiful yet somewhat dark nature to the whole entire song. The song is about two chaotic lovers giving into the chaos that they create, and knowing that one side might benefit from it more than the other, but a beautiful and nice touch. Forever is another one that stands out for being a little bit more, not necessarily subdued, but kind of touches back on previous stuff, though it does kind of mix a little bit of stuff on Wilder Mind with a little bit more electronic tinge, some drums on there, and there's some violin at the end, which is very nice. It does use the harmonies that you would be more familiar with on Sigh No More or Babel, but the weird thing is that they're electronically tinged, which feels really, really weird to me. But what I love about this song is the melody. There are a lot of really good melodies on this album, and this one is another one of those. So there are two other ones that, to me, stand out a little bit more as being more pleasurable songs. Those two being Slip Away and Rose of Sharon. These ones are kind of ones that, again, split that middle where they aren't necessarily so subdued or beautiful, but aren't necessarily so bombastic. Slip Away is great because it has some interesting guitar and banjo parts, and there's a nice build, a nice crescendo in the whole entire song. Mumford's vocals are very strong throughout the song. The ending isn't great, and it feels a little bit like something off the previous album, but feels a little bit more indie pop than more indie rock, if you will. Again, a nice song that seems a little bit more memorable than some of the other songs on the album. And then Rose of Sharon, what I like about this one is the eclectic nature of a lot of the parts on here. There's some hand drums, but there's also some electronic beats, and one of my favorite guitar parts on here. I think it just suits it very well. It has this little worldly flair, kind of Middle Eastern tinges with those hand drums, but I think it works very well together, even though the whole entire song isn't like hugely interesting to me, but I think the melody is very nice, and I like the atmospheric vocal parts in the interludes. So again, another one that kind of stands out from the rest of the crowd, but again, after that, you're getting some very lackluster songs. Not bad, just not hugely interesting. October Skies being the first one of those. It's alright, but the chorus is very bland, and coming after The Wild, it's not one that you are like, cool, I'm really, really interested in hearing this one. And then the other quick three that I haven't talked about is If I Say. Not the most interesting song either. Has some beautiful touches, but the lyrics aren't very interesting, and it just feels bland in terms of everything else. But the two biggest ones that are the nails in the coffin, if you will, are Picture You and Darkness Visible. Together, this is a 7-minute song if you put everything together, and Picture You is the most mainstream, most popish song on here, not just by vocals, which feels so different from what Chris Mumford has ever done vocally, but also from a arrangement standpoint. There's a lot of electronic ideas, and it's very simplistic for this band. It feels weird that this is in this album. And then after that, you get Darkness Visible, which takes those ideas and keeps it going with this, what I want to call an interlude. Gil Landry from the old Crow Medicine Show reads this passage from John Milton's Paradise Lost about the fall of man, and it feels like it's trying to be more artistic than it really should be, especially with this progression. Yeah, it kind of changes it up to this idea of a D chord and an F sharp chord, which don't usually work in the same scale together. So I think it's an interesting idea, but again, the music behind it isn't interesting enough to keep it for 7 minutes. That's the biggest problem with this album, is there's way too many different parts on here that are trying to do way too many different things. When it's great, it's some of their best work. I think that it's not for a lack of trying. I think there's a lot of really good parts on here if you pick and choose. But a whole entire album for 60 minutes with 14 tracks, especially when they're not really talking about anything new on this album. They've done a lot of these songs before, and I think even better lyrically. They're talking about the ideas of being with someone and making sure they want to be with someone and love. Other than Delta, which is taking the whole approach and being like, okay, I need to be here for my family, and I'm going to be there, and I'm going to listen to you guys, even though if you don't necessarily want me here. That is one of the nicer ideas on the album. And also Beloved is one that is a little bit of a nicer one. It's talking about seeing through the eyes of an older person coming to grips with mortality and knowing that they aren't going to be here much longer, but knowing that everyone around them still cares about them like they did when they were younger. Other than that, you know, there isn't much lyrical depth either. It's mostly the ideas of dealing with depression with a loved one, dealing with fighting with somebody, loving someone after all these years. I understand that, you know, that's not necessarily bad imagery, and there's some good imagery on here. There's some good topics on here, but on the whole, there's way too much. There's just way too much, and they try to do way too many different things and not space it out well enough. There's way too many songs that are very subdued next to each other, and there's a lot of songs that just aren't really interesting, at least to me, comparatively to the rest of the other albums that they have done. If they had just took out some of these songs, I think it would have been a much better album. I think it could have been in my top 50 if you got rid of Delta, 42, Darkness Visible. If I say Picture You, that's now 9 tracks. Maybe keep Delta, keep 42. You can keep those two. Maybe put them somewhere else on the album. Or for 42, like, that's such a good song if the mixing was a little bit better. I think that's another problem. Just having the beginning and ending songs so blah, it takes away from the rest of the album. Personally, I would have loved to have liked this album. I think there's a lot of really good songs on here, but there's just way too much of it. If they just simplified this a little bit more, take out some of these songs that are kind of the same in idea, and maybe put it on another album, I think it would have worked. Unfortunately, to me, this is easily their worst album. Even if some of the songs are better than some of the songs on Sigh No More, there's just way too much. So, with that being said, my final rankings of this discography is Delta number 4, Sigh No More number 3, Wilder Mind number 2, Babel number 1. For this particular album, I would say I can't recommend listening to the whole entire album. I can't. Even if you are a Mumford & Sons fan, I think you'll just get fatigued. I've had so many times I've been trying to listen to this album and just had to stop and then pick and choose. It's very hard for me to keep interested in this album. So for me, I would say listen to Guiding Light, Woman, Beloved, The Wild. I would say Slip Away, Rose of Sharon. I could throw October Skies in there. I think it's a nice song. And then Wild Heart and Forever. But even still, from there, I would say the ones that I think have absolutely no flaws, I don't think there is particular anyone, but one that has not like a grading idea to it, I would go Guiding Light, The Wild, Beloved, and then Wild Heart. And then, you know, the 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 songs, it has some good ideas, but aren't always as interesting as those top 4. So pick and choose, but I can't say listen to this whole entire album. If you do end up liking a lot of these songs, maybe listen to the whole entire thing, but I can't recommend it. So Delta itself debuted at number 1 on the US Billboard 200 with 237,000 album equivalent units, including 214,000 pure album sales. It is Mumford & Sons' 3rd US number 1 album. It was beaten to the top spot, though, in the UK by Michael Bublé's Love. So that's all so far. I don't know if it's going to make any headway in the Grammys or any of these album award shows, but if it does, I'll let you guys know. So that is my last video of 2018, finally, if you will. I'm done with the digging through discographies for right now. I'm done with the RU-ins. I have a lot of other videos, though, that I'm going to be putting up in January. If you like this album or this video, give this video a like. Let me know what you love or hate about the album. Most importantly, just subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. If you like what I'm doing and want to see more of this, especially because I'm going to be putting out more in 2019, then you should subscribe to this channel and ring that bell so that you are notified of when I'm going to be putting out more videos. So thank you so much for watching. This is The Music Fan signing off.